By the time Catherine Ross steadied the silver tray against her shaking wrists, Lady Ross had already called her a plain, ungrateful burden before a room of 40 people who suddenly found the mantel clock, the pianoforte lid, and the pattern of the carpet of uncommon interest. No one laughed, no one protested. The insult floated in the warm, candle-thick air, accepted as one accepts weather one cannot alter. Catherine's fingers tightened around the tray edge until the cut crystal glasses chimed together. She crossed the drawing-room without spilling a drop, set sherry before Sir Julian Fane, who took it with a cough and a murmur of thanks too low to be heard by anyone but her, and moved on as if her stepmother had spoken of the rain. It was always rain with Lady Ross, cold, constant, and managed so artfully that one forgot, for a moment, one was wet through. "Catherine!" Lady Ross called after her, her voice sweet enough to curdle cream. "Do stand straighter. Slouching is so very middle class." A few smiles appeared then, quick and guilty. Catherine turned, curtsied exactly as etiquette required, and said, "Yes, ma'am." At 22 she knew how they saw her. A useful shadow in her father's house, now her stepmother's stage. Her dark hair was pinned too tightly, because if a strand escaped, Lady Ross called her slovenly. Her gowns were always one season behind, because Lady Ross said extravagance did not suit a dependent. Her face, pale and fine-boned, was termed serviceable, as if it had been made to pass unnoticed in hallways and at tea-trays. Only her eyes drew comment when anyone looked long enough to notice them, grey, steady, and too observant for comfort. She had once been quick with retort. At 16 she had answered a snub from Lady Ross's fashionable friend with a sentence so precise the woman had not understood it until she reached her carriage, and then had sent a furious note. Her father, still alive then, had laughed in private and told Catherine that wit was a coin, not confetti. "Spend it rarely," he said. "Spend it where it buys freedom." After his death, she learned how true that was. Wit thrown in a drawing-room brought only punishment. Silence brought room to think. So she was silent now. Around her the evening resumed with practised ease. Card tables reformed, laughter stitched over the tear in civility. Lady Ross gliding among her guests, in emerald silk and diamonds, paid for with promises. Catherine moved between them, carrying glasses, replacing candles, fetching shawls, and receiving commands from men and women who had known her as the daughter of the house, and now preferred to forget it. When the final carriage had rolled away and the front doors closed, she took inventory because she trusted numbers more than memory. 3 silver teaspoons missing from the west sideboard, 2 decanters only half used, £4, 16 shillings spent on imported hothouse flowers that had wilted before dessert. Another evening purchased at ruinous cost to sustain the appearance of ease. In her small attic room, she lit 1 candle and opened the thin calfskin ledger she kept wrapped in muslin beneath her chemises. It had been her father's teaching book first, columns ruled in his hand, examples of interest and rent and wages with notes in the margin. Truth sits in totals, Cat. Follow the totals and lies will fail. Her own hand now filled the pages, neat, unadorned, unsparing. Date, expenditure, source, note. She copied what she had observed tonight and paused only when the pen hovered over a line she had written 3 times in 3 weeks. Paid to Mr. Lonsdale, broker, by private instruction of Lady R, sum withheld from household account. No receipt. She closed the ledger, pressed her palm flat over the cover, and listened to the house settle around her. Below, somewhere, Lady Ross laughed as she and her daughter reviewed the evening's successes and strategic disappointments. Catherine could have gone down and argued. She could have reminded Lady Ross that this had been her father's home, that she had legal rights to a portion on marriage, that humiliating her in public did nothing to improve the family's finances. Could have. Instead, she blew out the candle and lay awake in the dark, counting expenses by memory until sleep came like surrender. The disruption arrived by breakfast post in the shape of a cream-laid envelope edged in black and sealed with the Harbury crest. Lady Ross slit it with her knife before the toast had cooled. Her eyes ran quickly, then narrowed with that particular brightness Catherine had learned to fear, opportunity sharpened by desperation. "Catherine," she said without looking up, "you have decent penmanship and can recite French irregular verbs, can you not?" "Yes, ma'am." "Excellent. You are to travel on Thursday." Catherine set down the marmalade spoon. "Travel where?" Lady Ross folded the letter and tapped it against her lip, already arranging the future. "Harbury Hall requires a temporary governess for the Earl's ward. Their current woman has absconded to marry a curate, which is exactly what one might expect from women paid to instruct children in obedience." Catherine waited. Lady Ross glanced up then, smile thin as wire. "Do not wear that expression. You ought to be grateful. Your board here has become an expensive charity." Her daughter, Miss Amelia Ross, golden-haired, jewelled at breakfast, and perpetually amused, laughed into her chocolate. "Poor Catherine, exiled to the country with slates and sermon books." "Hardly exile," Lady Ross said. "Harbury is one of the oldest houses in the county, and Lord Harbury one of the richest men in England." There it was. Catherine could almost hear the click of pieces on a board. Lady Ross continued, delicate as a surgeon. "His lordship has recently endured domestic bereavement. He is said to be disinclined to society and in need of practical management. You will be obedient, invisible, and useful. You will not offer opinions unless asked. You will report any matter that may concern this family." "Concern this family," Catherine repeated. "Do not be tiresome." Lady Ross buttered her toast. "If Lord Harbury is making decisions regarding his ward, household, or future marriage, we ought to be informed. Amelia must not be introduced at a disadvantage." Amelia smiled, admiring her reflection in the tea-urn. "I do hate disadvantage." Catherine looked from one to the other and understood the true order beneath the polished words. Lady Ross's debts were no longer quiet. She needed alliance, access, rescue. Catherine was to be sent ahead as scout and convenience, useful precisely because no one would suspect her of strategy. "When do I return?" Catherine asked. "When I decide," said Lady Ross. "Try for once to justify your keep." 3 days later, Catherine sat in a hired carriage with one trunk, a stack of copybooks, and a sealed note of instruction from Lady Ross she had not yet opened. Rain streaked the glass. Mile by mile, London's noise thinned into wet fields and stone villages, and long stretches of hedgerow where crows rose in black bursts at the carriages passing. Harbury Hall appeared at dusk, broad-fronted, severe, lit from within by measured squares of amber light. No lanterns flared theatrically. No music spilled from windows. It looked less like a house prepared to impress, and more like one determined to endure. Inside, everything was ordered. Servants moved quietly, efficiently, in well-practised routes. The butler, Mr. Pike, received her with impeccable courtesy and no curiosity. The nursery maid showed her to a modest room adjoining the schoolroom, and informed her in a whisper that Miss Eliza had not slept through a night in months. "His lordship sits up sometimes," the maid added, eyes downcast, "when she cries. It's best not to mention it." Lord Harbury received Catherine the next morning in the library. Nathaniel Vale, Earl of Harbury, was younger than rumour made him, and far more tired. His face was controlled into polite neutrality, every line composed. Grief had not made him dramatic. It had made him exact. He asked about Catherine's education, handwriting, languages, music, health. He listened without interruption and dismissed her with formal thanks and instructions regarding Eliza's lessons. Not one gesture, not one flicker of expression, betrayed temper or vanity or softness. If he had been carved from winter oak, he could not have seemed more reserved. Miss Eliza was 6, slight and solemn by day, with a careful way of speaking that suggested she expected correction before comfort. She read well, counted badly, and clung to a faded blue ribbon as if it were a talisman. At night she woke screaming for a mother who would not come, her little body rigid with fear, while Catherine held her and hummed whatever tune arrived first to fill the dark. On Catherine's second night, after finally settling the child back to sleep, she went in search of more lamp oil through the old nursery passage, a corridor little used since the family wing had been altered years before. The air there smelled faintly of cedar and dust and old linen. She rounded a half-open door and stopped. The room beyond had once been a nursery closet, now mostly empty. Lord Harbury stood by a table beneath a single lamp, one hand braced against the wood, the other holding a tiny child's shoe, white kid leather, scuffed at the toe, absurdly small in his large hand. His shoulders shook once, then again. He made no sound. It was the most private kind of weeping, controlled, silent, almost angry in its refusal to be heard. Catherine stepped back at once, the instinct swift as breath. She did not gasp, did not retreat noisily, did not call his name. She turned on the heel of her slipper and walked away as softly as she had come, carrying with her the image of that small shoe and the grief bent over it like prayer. At breakfast the next morning the Earl asked whether Miss Eliza had slept. "She woke once, my lord," Catherine said, "but settled quickly." "Thank you." Their eyes met for 1 second. His expression was unchanged, polite frost as ever. But something in Catherine's understanding had shifted. The cold was not contempt. It was weathered sorrow held in discipline because collapse helped no child. She opened Lady Ross's sealed instructions that afternoon. The letter was brief and venomous in its precision. Be agreeable to his lordship. Observe everything. Discover where the guardianship papers are kept and whether the child's fortune may be directed by marriage. Do not fail me again. At the bottom, in a different ink, a postscript. Remember who feeds you. Catherine folded the letter into quarters until the paper creased white. In the schoolroom next door, Eliza was sounding out words from a primer, stumbling over the difference between should and would. Her voice rose and fell in patient effort. Catherine tucked the letter into her workbox and went to hear the lesson. Within a week she understood the shape of the danger, though not yet its full depth. If she obeyed Lady Ross, she became accomplice to a design that reached toward a child's inheritance. If she refused, she risked being recalled in disgrace to a house where she had no income, no ally, and no shield against her stepmother's malice. She had no independent fortune, only the legal remnant of her father's portion, small, contested, and inaccessible without expensive petition. A whisper from Lady Ross could close most respectable employment to her. A rumour from Amelia could finish the rest. Dependence was not merely unpleasant. It was a trap with velvet lining. Yet Harbury altered her calculations daily. Miss Eliza began waiting by the schoolroom door 10 minutes before lessons, pretending she was there by accident. She smiled for the first time on a rainy Thursday when Catherine turned arithmetic into a game with dried beans and a stolen biscuit. She slept one full night with only a whimper at dawn, and woke astonished by her own rest. "Did I do well?" she asked, as if sleep were a recitation to be graded. You did beautifully, Catherine told her, and meant it. Downstairs the household accounts crossed Catherine's path by chance, or by habit too old to suppress. Mr. Pike mentioned at dinner that the steward in London had sent duplicate invoices again. Damnably untidy business. Catherine asked quietly whether she might look at the schoolroom supply bills to prevent over-ordering. Pike, practical man that he was, handed over the bundle without fuss. Numbers spoke, as her father had promised. 2 bills from one stationer for 1 delivery. Coal tallied at winter rates in late spring. A payment to a former steward who, according to staff gossip, had left Harbury months ago under uncertain circumstances. Nothing large enough alone to trigger alarm. Enough together to itch at the edge of certainty. She copied figures into her own notebook at night. Not yet as accusation, but as map. Lady Ross's second letter arrived before Sunday. You will remember your duty. Amelia may visit if circumstances are favourable. I trust you have not made yourself ridiculous by moral posturing. Catherine held the page over the grate until the edge browned, then thought of evidence and withdrew it from the flame. She would keep every letter. That evening, while Eliza drew crooked horses on scrap paper, Catherine sat beside her and considered the choices ahead with the clarity of someone long acquainted with bad options. If she played obedient spy, Lady Ross might secure leverage over Harbury and cement Amelia's path to a title. Catherine might earn temporary reprieve, perhaps even a modest dowry if gratitude ever overcame greed, which it would not. If she did nothing, Lady Ross would move anyway, blundering or bribing until harm was done. If she opposed her openly, she could lose position, reputation, and safety in one stroke. Across the table, Eliza looked up from her drawing and pushed the paper toward Catherine. One horse had an enormous head, 4 straight legs, and a blue ribbon at its neck. For you, the child said shyly, because you don't go away when I cry. Catherine took the picture with careful hands. There it was. Why this mattered. Not etiquette, not strategic marriages, not the brittle ranking of women by beauty and prospects. A child's trust, offered without calculation. A household held together by discipline over grief. The possibility, fragile, improbable, that truth might yet be made to count. Catherine smoothed the page flat and made her choice, though she did not speak it aloud. She would watch, she would gather proof, she would spend her wit when the time came, where it could buy something worth keeping. And until then, she would continue as she had in the passageway on that second night, seeing what was most human and refusing to use it as a weapon. She kept Eliza's drawing on the mantel in the schoolroom, propped against a brass inkstand, where the blue-ribboned horse could be seen from the door. It was there the next morning when Lord Harbury paused on his way past, glanced in to ask whether the child would walk before lessons, and found Eliza already at her sums with a serious crease between her brows. "She insisted," Catherine said. Eliza, without looking up, announced, 7 and 5 is 12. I did it before Miss Ross told me. A flicker, small, swift, but unmistakable, crossed the Earl's face. Pride, perhaps, or relief too cautious to name. "Did you indeed?" he said. "Then I must keep my purse buttoned, or you'll be counting my coin by dinner." Eliza gave him the ghost of a smile. He touched her head lightly, then left before the room could grow tender. Catherine watched him go and returned to the slate. "Again," she said gently, "this time without peeping at your fingers." Routine settled around them. Reading at 9, arithmetic at 10, French verbs after luncheon, a walk when weather allowed. At night, nightmares still came, but less violently. Eliza no longer woke already fighting invisible hands. She reached for Catherine now, not in panic alone, but in trust. And all the while, letters came. Lady Ross wrote every 4 days, sometimes 3. The handwriting itself seemed impatient, slanted hard as if it could drive nails. You will report on his habits in detail. Has he spoken of settlements, of the child's trustees? Who holds authority if he remarries? Do not send me pieties. Send facts, Catherine answered with careful dullness. Miss Eliza progresses in reading. His lordship dines at 7. The weather has delayed shipments from York. She gave nothing that could be used as leverage, and everything that could be mistaken for dutiful incompetence. It did not satisfy Lady Ross. By the 3rd week, Mr. Pike began forwarding packets to Catherine with the expression of a man delivering lit coals. One afternoon she broke a seal and read, in a line so heavily blotted the words had nearly torn through, "I am told you have grown intimate with household records. Remember your position. Ink on your fingers does not make you an heiress." Catherine folded the paper once and set it beneath her blotter. Her pulse stayed calm. She had learned long ago that rage spent on correspondence was a luxury. The numbers, however, would not leave her in peace. What began as schoolroom invoices widened with every small permission she requested. May I check copybook quantities against orders? May I compare coal usage in the nursery wing to last quarter, so we may economise? Mr. Pike, practical and overworked, kept agreeing. It spared him tasks and, in his judgment, cost nothing. Yet the same peculiar knots kept appearing. Duplicate charges entered under slightly altered names, payment vouchers marked urgent without signatures, and, most troubling, several remittances in the estate books to C. Bramwell, services rendered, though the man had not been on Harbury payroll since winter. "Bramwell was the London steward, wasn't he?" Catherine asked one evening as Pike reviewed cellar lists. Pike's mouth compressed. "Former steward." He left abruptly. He was dismissed. Pike stacked the lists with military precision. "His lordship does not discuss staff matters, Miss Ross, nor do I." "Oh, of course," she lowered her eyes. "I meant no impertinence." He softened by a fraction. "No, you meant arithmetic. It leads to similar trouble." That night, when Eliza finally slept, Catherine spread her notebook across her desk and copied dates into columns by candlelight. Father's method. Left column, disbursement. Right column, corresponding receipt. Margin, irregularity. She found 3 payments to Bramwell that aligned almost exactly with withdrawals noted elsewhere against the ward account, never named as such, but identifiable by reference number and trustee initials. The sums were not enormous. That, perhaps, was the cleverest part. Large thefts attracted pursuit. Smaller leaks passed for seepage. She stared at the figures until the ink blurred. Could Lord Harbury truly not know? Or had grief narrowed his focus to the child's immediate needs while men he once trusted skimmed what they could from legal delay? When she went to bed near dawn, she dreamed not of numbers, but of the tiny shoe in his hand, and woke with the certainty that whatever this was, it had been built in the years when sorrow had made him least able to fight, quietly conducted fraud. The first direct blow did not come from London, but from the gravel drive. A carriage bearing Lady Ross's crest arrived just before noon, with 2 trunks, 3 hat boxes, a maid, and Miss Amelia Ross draped in rose silk and confidence. Lady Ross stepped down smiling as if Harbury were a cherished relation, and not a fortress she meant to breach. "My dear Lord Harbury," she said in the hall, extending both hands before he had reached the final stair, "you are goodness itself to receive us at such short notice. Amelia has been languishing in town air. The child will be such a tonic." Amelia dipped a curtsy that displayed a very expensive necklace and very little sincerity. "How do you do, my lord? I have heard Harbury sunsets are almost Italian." "They are mostly northern," he replied, "but occasionally tolerable." Lady Ross laughed as if he had offered a sonnet. Catherine stood near the nursery door with Eliza's shawl over her arm and understood with cold clarity that the game had moved from letters to occupation. By supper the snares were visible. A chance turn in the gardens placed Amelia and the Earl alone on the lime walk, while Lady Ross detained the vicar's wife with talk of school subscriptions. A musical evening was proposed in which Amelia would sing and Lord Harbury must surely turn pages. Tea trays were redirected so Catherine entered rooms precisely when conversation might make her presence awkward. Twice she arrived to find Lady Ross saying, "Ah, Catherine, we were just speaking of how attached young ladies become in lonely houses," and watched two matrons raise brows over their cups. By the second day, whispers had begun among visiting neighbours invited by Lady Ross, under the pretext of enlivening the hall. The governess was too frequently consulted. The Earl was overly considerate. One must always be careful where plain girls with ambitions were concerned. Catherine heard enough to understand the pattern and ignored enough to survive it. She supervised lessons. She sat with Eliza through one bad afternoon of feverish crying. She corrected French exercises while laughter drifted up from below like clinking glass. She answered Lady Ross's barbs with "Yes, ma'am," and "As you wish," and spent no coin of wit. Then Amelia aimed at the child. It happened in the morning room after luncheon. Eliza stood by the window twisting the faded blue ribbon around her fingers, while Catherine sorted map cards. Amelia swept in with a spray of perfume and said, "What an ugly little rag! Surely we can improve on that," and reached to pull the ribbon free. Eliza recoiled as if struck. "No! Don't be absurd," Amelia said, tightening her grip. "It's filthy." Catherine crossed the room in 3 strides and took Eliza's hand, not Amelia's wrist. "Miss Eliza, come sit by me." Lady Ross, entering at that moment, drew herself up. "Catherine, do not dramatise. Amelia was helping." Eliza's face had gone white. She was breathing too fast, eyes fixed on the ribbon, as though losing it would unmake the room. "Helping whom?" Catherine asked before caution could stop her. Lady Ross's smile sharpened. "You forget yourself." "I remember exactly." Catherine's voice stayed low. "The child is not a toy for courtship displays." Amelia flushed scarlet. "How dare you?" "How dare I preserve my pupil from distress?" Catherine said. "Very easily." That evening Lady Ross chose dinner for retaliation. Guests filled the long table. Local gentry, a retired colonel, 2 ladies from York, and Mr. Penrith, the Harbury London solicitor who had arrived unexpectedly and wore self-importance like polished boots. Catherine sat halfway down by arrangement that placed her visible and voiceless. Lady Ross, brilliant in sapphire, steered conversation to female conduct with surgical malice. "Governesses," she said lightly, "occupy such difficult ground. Too familiar for servants, too aspiring for true society. One must guide them firmly, or they mistake kindness for equality." A murmur of agreement travelled like a draught. Amelia added sweetly, "And sometimes they become possessive of children not their own. It can look almost theatrical." Mr. Penrith chuckled into his wine. Catherine kept her gaze on her plate. 1 breath, 2, the old discipline. Then Lady Ross said, for all to hear, "Still, we do what charity requires. Some girls would be nowhere without a family willing to carry them." Across the table, Eliza, allowed down for first course as a treat, stiffened and put down her spoon. That was enough. Catherine lifted her head and spoke in the same even tone she used for spelling corrections. "A lady who borrows against her daughter's future," she said, "ought not lecture anyone on propriety." Silence struck the table like a bell. Lady Ross went very still. Amelia's mouth fell open. The Colonel coughed violently into his napkin to hide either laughter or horror. Lord Harbury did not move at all, but his eyes came to Catherine with sudden, focused attention. Lady Ross recovered first. "What an extraordinary remark," she said, voice trembling at the edges. "I cannot imagine what delusion—" "Nor I," Catherine replied, and returned her attention to the untouched soup before her. No one spoke of governesses again that evening. After dinner, Lady Ross cornered Catherine in the corridor outside the withdrawing room. Fans snapped shut like a blade. "You stupid, vicious girl," she hissed. "Do you think one sentence makes you formidable?" "No," Catherine said. "Evidence does." For one instant, something like fear crossed Lady Ross's face. It vanished at once, replaced by disdain. "Take care," she said. "You are very easily ruined." She turned away before Catherine could answer and glided back into candlelight. The next morning brought rain and Mr. Penrith installed in the estate office with stacks of folders and an air of irritated martyrdom. Lord Harbury, called unexpectedly to inspect storm damage on tenant farms, left before breakfast and would not return till evening. Catherine intended to keep to the schoolroom. She lasted until 11. Eliza was at copywork with the nursery maid when Mr. Pike appeared at the door. "Miss Ross, pardon. Could you spare half an hour? Penrith's clerk has mislaid the quarter's education statements, and his lordship asked that nursery accounts be ready tonight." Catherine set down her pen. "Of course." The estate office occupied a long room at the back of the west wing, lined with shelves, deed boxes, and a high desk scarred by generations of elbows. Rain tapped the leaded panes. Mr. Penrith had appropriated the central table and was dictating to his clerk in bored bursts. "Ah," he said, as Catherine entered, "the governess with an affection for ledgers." "Miss Ross has been useful," Pike said coolly. "Try not to discourage competence, Mr. Penrith." "It is scarce." Pike withdrew on another errand. Penrith smirked and went back to his papers. Catherine worked at the side table with school bills first, swift and neat. Ink, copybooks, French primers. Straightforward. She should have stopped there. Instead, while reaching for a blotter, she noticed a folded schedule left half beneath a trust register, labelled Ward Disbursements. Interim. Not for her eyes. Certainly not for a governess. She looked once toward Penrith. He was arguing with his clerk about postage and not watching. She looked down. Reference numbers, trustee initials, dates. She knew those numbers. She had copied their twins from household books at midnight for weeks. And there, in the margin beside 2 delayed guardianship filings, a notation in Penrith's cramped hand. Hold pending instruction from L.R. The room seemed to narrow. L.R. Not a coincidence. Not any more. Catherine slid the schedule back exactly where she found it and forced her breathing steady. She needed more than one damning scribble. She needed a chain no one could dismiss as feminine misreading or wounded pride. "Mr. Penrith," she said pleasantly, "I fear I cannot reconcile the nursery coal figures without March vouchers. Were they perhaps sent up from London with your packet?" He sighed theatrically. "In the green file, I imagine. Clerk, where is the green file?" A chaotic search followed. In the confusion, Catherine was handed 3 bundles to sort by date. Among them, correspondence stubs, remittance receipts, and copies of payment orders from Harbury's account to C. Bramwell, authorised not by the Earl but by temporary instruction routed through Penrith's chambers. One receipt bore Lady Ross's crest in faint reverse from the paper beneath it, as though signed atop her own stationery. Another included a line item: Consultancy, Ward Settlement Postponement. Catherine's fingertips went cold. She sorted everything with outward calm, separating March from April, school from estate, while her mind built columns at speed. Payment to Bramwell, same date as trust withdrawal. Instruction from LR, same week guardianship order delayed. Penrith fee increase, booked as legal contingency. She did not need conjecture now. She had pattern, date, amount, conduit. When Pike returned, she asked quietly, "May I remain an hour longer this afternoon? I would like the school statements flawless before his lordship reviews them." Pike, harried and grateful, nodded. "Lock up when done." By 4 o'clock Penrith had gone to dress. The clerk carried boxes away. Rain thickened into evening. Catherine stood alone in the office with the records spread before her like a confession. She worked quickly, methodically, copying entries in the exact hand her father had trained. Date, payee, amount, cross-reference, source. No flourish, no accusation. Facts aligned in ruthless sequence. Twice her pen spluttered. Twice she trimmed it and continued. She copied Penrith's margin note verbatim. She copied receipt numbers. She copied the interim ward disbursement schedule and marked where sums vanished into Bramwell's services. At last she sanded the sheets, stacked them and wrapped them in plain paper. On the outer fold she wrote only, "For Lord Harbury. Urgent." Then she sealed it with wax from the office stick and pressed Pike's spare stamp into the soft red circle before it set. Her hands shook only when it was done. Dusk had fallen by the time Lord Harbury returned, boots mud-splashed, coat damp at the shoulders. Catherine waited in the library doorway while he handed gloves to a footman and dismissed 2 tenant letters with quiet instructions. "My lord," she said. He turned at once. "Miss Ross, is Eliza unwell?" "No, my lord, she is with nurse and perfectly safe." Something in her tone must have reached him. He set the letters aside. "Come in." The library fire was low. Rain whispered at the windows. Catherine stepped to the desk and placed the sealed packet before him. "I ask your pardon for presumption," she said, "but I ask it after the fact, not before. These are copied entries from estate and trust records. I believe money has been diverted from Miss Eliza's account through your former steward, with assistance from Mr. Penrith, and under instruction connected to Lady Ross." He did not touch the packet yet. "That is a grave claim." "Yes, my lord." "Are you certain?" "I am certain of the figures." Her throat tightened, but her voice held. "And I am certain the guardianship delays are not clerical accidents." A beat, too. "Why bring this to me," he said quietly, "when it exposes your own family?" Because the child asked if she had slept well, Catherine thought. Because you wept over a shoe and did not weaponize your grief against the world. Aloud she said, "Because she has no one else who sees the whole of it in time." He broke the seal. She stood in silence while his eyes moved down the first page, then the second. His expression didn't change quickly. It tightened by degrees, like metal cooling into shape. Once he went back and reread a line. Once he looked toward the rain-black window, as if measuring consequences already in motion. When he finished, he laid the pages flat with deliberate care and lifted his gaze to hers. For the first time since her arrival, he looked at Catherine Ross not as a temporary governess, not as an obligation sent by inconvenient relations, but as an ally he had not expected to find. "Thank you," he said, and in those 2 words was the beginning of war. He rang for Mr. Pike before Catherine had taken 2 steps back from the desk. When the butler entered, Lord Harbury did not raise his voice. "Lock the estate office. No papers, leave it tonight. No one enters without my word, not Mr. Penrith, not his clerk, no one. Post Thomas at the west corridor door." Pike's brows lifted once. "Yes, my lord." "And send a rider to York for Mr. Anstruther. Mark it immediate." Catherine glanced up. Your family solicitor? My mother's, Harbury said, which is why he still knows the difference between duty and convenience. Pike nodded and withdrew. For a moment only the fire and the rain spoke. Harbury gathered her copied sheets, tapped them square, and slid them into a leather folio as if handling something both fragile and explosive. Miss Ross, he said, from this moment do not be alone with Lady Ross if you can avoid it. Keep her letters. Keep anything with dates. If anyone asks what we discussed, you came to report on Eliza's copywork and nothing more. You believe she will move quickly? I believe she already has. At dinner, Lady Ross was all charm and satin, but she watched the table the way a card player watches hands, not faces. Penrith spoke too much, laughed too loudly, and twice attempted to draw Harbury into legal talk before soup was cleared. My lord, he said, dabbing his mouth, if you've concerns regarding trust disbursement, I can settle them in half an hour tomorrow. Harbury cut his pheasant with surgeon's precision. How efficient! We shall require more than half an hour. Penrith's fork paused. Amelia rescued the moment with a songful remark about weather in Bath, and the conversation drifted. But under the clink of silver, Catherine felt strain tightening through the room like wire drawn between posts. By morning, Penrith had developed, according to his clerk, an urgent reason to return to town. He left before breakfast with 2 dispatch cases and no farewell. Lady Ross received the news in the morning room and smiled without showing teeth. How provoking, she said. Men of business are so unreliable. Then she turned to Catherine, who stood by the escritoire sorting Eliza's geography cards. Do walk with me later, Lady Ross said lightly. We have family matters to discuss privately. Catherine met her gaze. I am engaged with Miss Eliza's lessons until 4. A beat. How conscientious, Lady Ross murmured. By luncheon, the servants' hall knew Catherine had spent a suspicious interval with his lordship in the library. By tea, the story had improved itself. She had emerged pale and trembling. His lordship had locked the door behind her. There had been raised voices. By evening, Mrs. Dodd, the housekeeper, mortified, warned Catherine in a whisper that Amelia had been asking whether governesses were commonly romantic creatures. Catherine thanked her and said nothing. The blow came after midnight. A crash from the west wing jarred the house awake, boots on corridor boards, a shout, then Mr. Pike's voice, clipped and furious. Catherine wrapped a shawl over her nightdress and opened her door in time to see 2 footmen carrying a smoking metal coal scuttle from the estate office. The air reeked of scorched paper. Harbury came down the corridor bareheaded, coat thrown over his shirt, expression carved into hard calm. Report! Pike held up a singed ledger clasp. Lock forced! Deed box is opened. Someone attempted to burn vouchers in the grate. Thomas smelled it before it took properly. We've saved most, but not all. What's missing? Ward Trust Daybook for Michaelmas quarter. Penrith's correspondence bundle for February. Several receipt stubs. Catherine felt the floor tilt under her feet. Harbury turned to her at once. Your copies? Safe, she said. In your folio. Lady Ross appeared at the end of the corridor in a wrapper of ivory silk, one hand at her throat in practised alarm. Amelia hovered behind her like a pretty ghost. Good heavens, Lady Ross breathed. Burglars? In this house? No burglars crossed the outer yard, Pike said. No window broken. Whoever did it knew exactly where to go. Amelia gave a tiny gasp. How dreadful! For poor Eliza's papers as well. Harbury's gaze moved from mother to daughter and back again. Miss Eliza's protection remains my concern. Naturally, Lady Ross folded her wrapper closer. You must forgive me. I only think how very exposed a household can become when too many outsiders are admitted to confidential rooms. Her eyes brushed Catherine and slid away. By dawn, stakes that had been hidden in ledgers stood plain as daylight. Without original daybooks and correspondence, formal proof thinned. Catherine's copies were powerful, but copies could be attacked. If Lady Ross and Penrith cast enough doubt, Chancery could delay action for months. Months in which signatures might be procured, settlements nudged, money siphoned cleanly into fees and advances. Months in which Catherine could be discredited beyond repair, dismissed as a resentful dependent who forged figures to punish her family. And if she were ruined, she could no longer stand between Eliza and those who treated children as instruments. By breakfast, Lady Ross had resumed her smile. By breakfast, war had become open. Mr. Anstruther arrived from York on the second evening, rein stiff and severe, with spectacles that flashed whenever someone lied. Harbury took him straight to the library with Pike, and did not emerge for 2 hours. Catherine waited in the schoolroom with Eliza, who was building a fortress from copybooks and refusing to admit she was frightened. "Will there be thieves again?" Eliza asked, placing a French grammar atop the battlements. "Not if Mr. Pike can help it," Catherine said, "and he can help a great many things." When Harbury finally sent for her, she found Anstruther seated at the desk with her copied pages spread in exact rows. "Miss Ross," the solicitor said, rising, "my lord tells me these are your hand?" "Yes." "Were any made in presence of witness?" "No." "Were any made from originals now missing?" "Some." Anstruther exhaled through his nose. "Damn!" Harbury's jaw tightened. "Say it plainly." "Plainly? Very well." Anstruther tapped the pages. "These are excellent working evidence. They are not yet courtroom certainty. If Penrith contests authenticity and originals are gone, we must corroborate by parallel books, bank drafts, clerk testimony and correspondence." "Doable, but not by tomorrow." "Tomorrow may be too late," Harbury said. Anstruther's eyes flicked briefly toward Catherine. "Then you must secure the child physically while I secure her legally." That strategy lasted 12 hours. By noon next day, Penrith's affidavit arrived by express, countersigned by a magistrate in town. It accused Catherine of unauthorised access to estate books, emotional instability, and deliberate alteration of copied entries to inflame his lordship against long-standing advisers. It further suggested she had acted under personal attachment inappropriate to her station. Lady Ross produced, with trembling reluctance and impeccable timing, a letter she claimed Catherine had sent weeks earlier speaking of using figures to compel gratitude. The phrasing was Catherine's in cadence, but not in word choice, close enough to soil, false enough to enrage. "I did not write it," Catherine said. Lady Ross looked stricken. "Must we always descend to denial?" Amelia pressed a handkerchief to her eyes. Anstruther read the page, expression flat. "Forgery," he said softly to Harbury, "but elegant." That afternoon came the order Catherine had dreaded and still not anticipated in its cruelty. Pending inquiry, no non-family adult was to have unsupervised influence over the ward's legal declarations or correspondence. Penrith had framed it as protection against coaching. The magistrate, cautious and distant, had signed. Anstruther swore with professional creativity and set to drafting challenge papers. Challenge papers would take time. Time was exactly what Lady Ross wanted. Harbury came to the schoolroom himself. Eliza sat at the table with her ribbon wound around both wrists like a binding. Catherine stood by the window, hands clasped so tightly, her knuckles blanched. He stopped 3 feet inside the door, as if crossing farther might break something. "Miss Ross," he said quietly, "until this order is stayed, lessons must be conducted with Mrs. Dodd present." Eliza looked up. Why? No punishment, darling, he said at once. A legal formality. I don't like formalities. Her mouth trembled. They make people go away. Catherine crossed quickly and knelt beside her. I am still here, she said. Do you hear me? Still here. Eliza clutched at her sleeve. Promise! I promise! Harbury turned away for 1 second, hand braced on the doorframe, then mastered himself. Mrs. Dodd will come now. That was the public loss. The private one waited in Catherine's room. Someone had searched it. Not ransacked, too clever for that. Drawers shut, coverlet smoothed, trunk latched. But the order was wrong. Chemises folded in reverse. Workbox shifted 1 inch left. And beneath the false bottom, where she had kept Lady Ross's letters, only empty wood. Every letter was gone. Commands, threats, the postscript in altered ink. Remember who feeds you. Gone. She sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the open compartment until dusk swallowed the corners of the room. Without those letters, motive blurred. Without motive, Lady Ross could perform maternal concern, while others called Catherine dramatic or vindictive. Her copies still stood, yes, but the chain tightening around Lady Ross's intent had snapped. For the first time since she had chosen to fight, Catherine felt uncertainty strike below reason, at the place where courage is mostly stubbornness and breath. What if she had miscalculated? What if truth, however tidy on paper, could be drowned by rank and timing and practiced tears? What if in trying to shield Eliza, she had only handed Lady Ross a cleaner target? Down the corridor, Eliza began to cry, thin at first, then in ragged waves Catherine knew by heart. Catherine rose instinctively, took 1 step toward the door, and stopped. Mrs. Dodd's slower, soothing voice answered from within the nursery. Not needed, said the legal order in invisible ink across every wall. She closed her door and stood in the dark until the crying eased. That night, Nathaniel Vale did not go to bed. After the house stilled, he went instead to the old passage behind the nursery wing, where the floor dipped near the linen press, and the plaster still held a faint pencil mark of his daughter's height at 3 years and 2 months. The closet door gave under his hand with the same reluctant scrape. Inside, the lamp burned low. On the table lay the white kid shoe, wrapped in linen except for the scuffed toe. He had meant, years ago, to put it away properly. Instead, he returned to it whenever grief rose sharp enough to need shape. He sat, elbows on knees, and let the mask slide off his face. He had been praised after Alice died for composure, for dignity, for not making a spectacle as men less disciplined did. They did not see the cost of that praise. Signatures placed without reading, trust in old advisers because thinking hurt, legal packets left unopened while he walked corridors at night, listening for a child who no longer cried. Then Helen died in confinement 6 months later, and the house learned to move quietly around him. By the time Eliza came to him, orphaned, his brother and sister-in-law gone in a carriage accident, he was functioning, efficient, and hollowed. He protected what he could touch: medicine, blankets, nursery lamps, the rhythm of stories at bedtime when she would permit them. The rest he delegated to men with respectable shoes and inherited references. Now the rest had teeth. He had failed once by drowning in sorrow. He would not fail again by drowning in propriety. Yet he had already asked Catherine to bear cost for his strategy. Public suspicion, curtailed access to the child, isolation under his own roof. He had seen her face when she found her authority stripped for appearances. Not anger first, hurt first, then iron. Near 2 a.m, he knocked once at her sitting-room door. When she opened, candle in hand, she looked unsurprised. as if she had been awake and waiting for some verdict no one could deliver. "My lord, may I come in?" She stepped aside. He didn't sit. "I owe you plain speech. The order is temporary, and Struther will challenge it at dawn. But until it is lifted, I must appear to comply, or Penrith will claim coercion and freeze every petition we file." "I understand the tactic," she said. "I know you do." He swallowed. Understanding is not the same as being unharmed by it. Silence settled, not hostile, only tired. He drew a breath that shook despite him. When my daughter died, I told myself control was kindness. If I never broke, no one else need fear. In practice, it meant I stopped seeing what happened beyond arm's reach. I left papers to men who smiled. I left decisions for later. Later is where rot grows. Catherine's candlelight caught the wet shine in his eyes before he turned his head. "I cannot lose another child to my own inattention," he said, voice rough. "And I cannot fight this cleanly if they make you the scandal at the centre of it. I am asking you to endure one more indignity while I take the legal ground back." She set the candle down, so both hands were free. "I can endure indignity," she said. "I have had practice." Something like pain crossed his mouth at that. "But," she added, "do not mistake endurance for ease. If you mean to trust me in daylight as well as midnight." He bowed his head once. "Fairly said." At the door he paused. "There is one more thing," he said, without turning. "If this worsens, they may try to remove Eliza from the house under pretext of health or feminine supervision. If they do, I will oppose it to the last instrument available. Whatever is said about you, whatever is said about us, remember that." "Us!" He left before the word could gather meaning between them. Catherine stood listening to his steps fade down the corridor, then sat slowly beside the cold grate, palms open on her knees, as if steadying herself for impact. Impact came 2 days later, dressed as hospitality. Lady Ross announced a musicale to restore spirits after recent unpleasantness, inviting half the county with miraculous speed, matrons who prize scandal as moral caution, gentlemen who enjoyed seeing others cornered, and enough witnesses to make any private dispute irrevocably public. Amelia would sing. There would be cards. A neighbouring baronet accepted. So did the vicar's wife, the colonel, and 3 ladies who carried gossip like holy water. Anstruther advised cancellation. Harbury refused. "If I cancel, she claims fear. If I permit, she overreaches in public." "Or wins in public," Anstruther muttered. By evening, Harbury Hall blazed with candles. Catherine dressed in her plainest grey and pinned her hair with uncompromising neatness. Mrs. Dodd, loyal and anxious, squeezed her hand once before they descended. "Keep your chin high, miss." In the drawing-room, Lady Ross sparkled in black jet and widow's pearls, a study in dignified suffering. Amelia wore diamonds bright enough to signal ships. Eliza was not present. Harbury had kept her upstairs with nurse and 2 footmen outside the nursery door. Music began. Applause rose and fell. Conversations eddied. Catherine stood near a side table and made herself impossible to ignore and impossible to dismiss. Calm, visible, unflinching. Halfway through Amelia's second song, a small commotion stirred near the card tables. Amelia stopped mid-phrase, hand flying to her throat. "My bracelet!" she gasped. "Mama, my emerald bracelet is gone!" Voices overlapped at once. "When did you last have it?" "Just before the song. Perhaps in your dressing-room." Lady Ross rose, pale with controlled alarm. "No one leaves the room, if you please. I am sure this is a misunderstanding." Harbury stepped forward from the mantel. "Search discreetly," he said to Pike. "No scene." "Too late for that," Lady Ross said faintly. Her gaze swept the room, then settled, regretful, wounded, inevitable, on Catherine. Pike returned within minutes carrying a small velvet case. "Found in Miss Ross's workbox, my lord, in the anteroom." A murmur ran through the guests like flame through dry grass. Catherine did not move. "That is impossible!" Lady Ross's voice trembled beautifully. "Catherine, if you have done this in distress, if financial anxieties drove you, only tell the truth now." Anstruther swore under his breath. Penrith, who had appeared late and silent as mildew, stepped from the back with a folded packet in hand. "My lord, before we proceed, there is also the matter of these altered account copies and certain letters suggesting Miss Ross intended to secure influence in this house by any means." Harbury's face went white with fury, so cold it seemed almost calm. Lady Ross turned to the assembled guests, tears standing in her eyes, and said, "I had prayed not to expose private shame, but for the safety of the child, I must insist everything be brought into the open." She faced Catherine fully. "Did you steal my daughter's jewels?" she asked, "and forge those books to trap Lord Harbury?" The room held its breath, and Catherine, pale as winter and steady as a drawn blade, stepped forward into the silence. And Catherine, pale as winter and steady as a drawn blade, stepped forward into the silence. "Since Lady Ross asks for truth," she said, "let us begin with facts." No one moved. Even Amelia's hand had fallen from her throat. Catherine turned first to Mr. Pike. "You said the bracelet was found in my workbox. Was the box locked?" Pike glanced toward Harbury, then back. "No, miss. Lid unlatched." "Thank you. Please tell the room where I keep the key." "In your reticule," Pike said. "Always." Catherine lifted the small key on its ribbon from her wrist and held it up between finger and thumb. "This key has not left me tonight. I can account for it since dressing for dinner." Lady Ross gave a soft, incredulous laugh. "A key proves nothing. You could have opened it yourself." "Possibly," Catherine said. "If I had wished to frame myself, I should certainly have left the box obligingly open in a public anteroom." A ripple, quickly smothered, went through the room. She turned to Amelia. "When did you last feel the bracelet on your wrist?" Amelia blinked. I told you, before singing." "Felt it or saw it?" Amelia's chin lifted. "Both." Catherine nodded. "Mrs. Dodd dressed you for the evening, did she not?" Mrs. Dodd, rigid beside the tea-table, answered before Amelia could. "I fastened Miss Amelia's bracelet at 7:30, miss." "Did you note anything unusual?" Dodd hesitated, then drew herself upright. "The clasp pin was loose. I said it should go to the jeweller after supper." Amelia flushed. "You fuss about everything." Catherine faced the guests again. "So, a loose clasp, an open box, and an accusation delivered before anyone searched dressing rooms, corridors, or music stands. We may call that many things. We may not call it proof." Lady Ross stepped forward, voice shaking with righteous injury. "You rehearsed this insolence. You always were the theatrical when cornered." "No," Catherine said. "I am only prepared." She reached into the inner pocket of her plain grey gown and withdrew a folded packet tied with blue thread. Lady Ross's eyes flickered, only once, but Catherine saw it. "These are your letters," Catherine said. "Not the bundle taken from my room. Those were copies. These are originals I stored elsewhere when your concern for my correspondence became so active." Penrith made a sharp sound. "My lord, surely we are not to admit private family notes into—" "Read one aloud," Harbury said, without looking at him. Catherine handed the top sheet not to Harbury, but to Colonel Ainsworth, who had risen half from his chair in stiff outrage and now froze with the paper in his hand. The Colonel squinted and read in his parade-ground voice, "Be agreeable to his lordship. Observe everything. Discover where the guardianship papers are kept and whether the child's fortune may be directed by marriage. Do not fail me again." The rooms seemed to inhale and forget to exhale. Catherine passed him the second. He read, "Remember who feeds you." Lady Ross's composure cracked, then reset. "Any maid can imitate a hand." Catherine gave a small nod, as if she had expected no better. "Then perhaps Mr. Penrith will identify his own." From the packet she drew 2 copied sheets and 1 scorched original voucher, its edge blackened from the office grate. She laid all 3 on the card table. "Mr. Penrith," she said, "is this your marginal note beside ward disbursement delay? Hold pending instruction from L.R.? Penrith did not approach. "L.R. could signify legal review." "Indeed?" Catherine asked. "Then how unfortunate that the same page records an appointment in your hand. Mrs. Ross calls Thursday regarding settlement postponement." Anstruther, at last smiling without humour, took the page and held it up. "He's right-handed and loops his R like a fish hook. It is his." Penrith reddened. "Copied, altered." Catherine did not look at him now. She looked at Lady Ross. "You demanded I find the guardianship papers," she said softly. "You threatened, instructed and pressed for control of a child's money. When delay served you, delay became policy. When numbers threatened you, papers burned. When that failed, jewellery appeared in my box. Shall I continue?" Lady Ross's face went white under powder. "You vindictive little hypocrite, after all I have done to keep you clothed." "Kept me," Catherine's voice sharpened for the first time. "You spent my father's plate, mortgaged his horses, borrowed against Amelia's dowry, and called it management. You called me burden while using my labour to host the men who extended your credit. You sent me here to pry into a child's trust and expected gratitude for the privilege." Her hands were steady now, utterly steady. "You asked for truth in public. Here it is in public." Amelia sprang up, tears bright and hot. "Mamma, we should leave." "This is vulgar." "No!" Lady Ross snapped, then caught herself. She rounded on Harbury with sudden, trembling earnestness. "My lord, you see what she is, clever, cold, unsexed by spite. She wants your pity, your house, your name. This is exactly how plain women climb." Harbury did not answer her. His eyes were on Catherine. Lady Ross, desperate, struck where she had always struck deepest. "She is nothing," she spat. "A bastard ingrate from my husband's first disgrace." The word cracked across the room like a whip. Catherine went very still. When she spoke, her voice was low and clear. "My birth has never been your shame to spend." For 1 suspended second, nobody breathed. Then Lady Ross lunged. She reached across the table for the packet of letters, nails catching paper, and would have torn it in half had Catherine not moved first. Catherine caught Lady Ross's wrist mid-air, not violently, but with iron precision. "No," Catherine said. Penrith stepped forward. "Unhand her!" Anstruther blocked him with one arm. Pike moved in from the side. Chairs scraped, silk hissed. Somebody cried out. Catherine released Lady Ross at once and handed the packet directly to Harbury. "Keep these under witness." Harbury took them, and in that instant the room understood the axis had shifted. Lady Ross did not collapse. She transformed. Tears vanished. Her spine straightened. When she spoke again, she sounded almost calm. "Very well," she said. "If we are to trade documents, let us trade all. Mr. Penrith?" Penrith, sweating now, produced his folded affidavit with a flourish that shook only slightly. "Here is sworn testimony, my lord, that Miss Ross accessed accounts without authority, copied private records, and has exhibited instability of conduct. There is also a letter." Forged, Catherine said. Convenient, Penrith snapped. Lady Ross spread her hands to the guests. You see, every charge answered by denial. This is precisely why women of uncertain positions should not be entrusted with legal matters they cannot understand. Catherine said nothing for a moment. Then she turned to Penrith with the polite expression she used when correcting Eliza's arithmetic. Did you sign an affidavit this morning? She asked, stating the Michaelmas daybook had been missing for weeks. Penrith blinked. Yes. Yet at last night's attempted fire, Mr. Pike recovered that same daybook from the grate, scorched but legible. Would you like him to fetch it? Penrith's mouth opened, closed. Catherine continued, still mild. If it was long missing, how came it into the estate office fire? If it was not missing, why swear it was? A murmur rose, louder this time. Penrith recovered enough to sneer. A clerk's error in dating. Hardly conspiracy. Then let us have the clerk, Catherine said. He is in the servants' hall. I asked Mr. Pike to keep him from leaving. Penrith stared at her. Lady Ross whipped toward him. You said he'd gone! I thought! You thought! She hissed. Harbury's voice cut through them. Bring the clerk! Thomas, white-faced and 19, was ushered in by a footman and looked as though he might faint on the carpet. Catherine stepped back to give him space and addressed him gently. Thomas, did Mr. Penrith instruct you to copy my hand from schoolroom notes? Penrith barked. You need not answer that. Harbury said, He will answer. Thomas swallowed so hard his throat clicked. Yes, my lord. A collective gasp broke decorum entirely. Thomas rushed on, words tumbling. He said it were for filing practice, and then Lady Ross come in and said, Right, compel gratitude, because ladies say that sort, and I didn't know. I didn't know it'd be swore to magistrate. Penrith lunged toward the boy. Pike intercepted him with professional efficiency and a grip like iron tongs. Lady Ross drew herself up in glittering contempt. This is absurd. You mean to take a stable-born clerk over me? Catherine answered before anyone else could. No, we mean to take dates, sums and signatures over performance. Lady Ross turned on her, all masks gone. You sanctimonious little beggar, you think this wins you anything. Society will not thank you, men will not marry you. You will always be the girl carrying trays, while better women choose your future. Catherine looked at her stepmother fully, perhaps for the first time in years without fear. I carried trays because I had to, she said. I am speaking now because I choose to. Lady Ross made a strangled sound and reached for the nearest weapon, words sharpened for years. I should have turned you out when your father died. You tried, Catherine said quietly. You merely preferred free labour. Anstruther stepped in, brisk and cold. My lord, with witness present, I advise immediate written suspension of Mr. Penrith from all trust instruments, notice to the magistrate regarding false affidavit, and temporary restraint on Lady Ross's access to Miss Eliza pending inquiry. Lady Ross laughed once, high and brittle. You cannot restrain me. I am family. Harbury faced her at last. His voice was almost gentle. You were a guest? He looked to Pike. Lady Ross and Miss Amelia will retire at once and depart Harbury within the hour. Provide escort and inventory their luggage. Nothing from this house leaves unexamined. Amelia burst into sobs. Mamma! Lady Ross did not look at her. She stared at Harbury with naked hatred. You will regret humiliating me. I regret inviting you, he said. She pivoted toward Catherine for a final strike. You think you've destroyed me. Catherine held her gaze. No, you did that when you decided a child's grief was negotiable. Lady Ross moved as if to slap her. Harbury stepped between them before the hand could rise. Enough! The single word landed like a locked door. Pike signalled 2 footmen. Lady Ross was not touched, but she was surrounded, guided, contained by impeccable service, sharper than force. Amelia stumbled after, weeping into lace. Penrith, abandoned, made one last bid for dignity. "My lord, this is irregular. So is arson," Anstruther said. "You may discuss regularity with the sheriff." When the doors shut behind them, the room stood in stunned quiet amid overturned cards and guttering candles. Harbury turned to the witnesses, the colonel, the vicar's wife, the baronet, 3 matrons who would carry this night to every breakfast table in the county. "You have heard sufficient," he said. "If any here values Miss Eliza's welfare, you will report accurately." No one mistook him. The house did not sleep. By midnight the drawing-room had become a legal chamber. Anstruther commandeered the writing table. Pike supplied sand, fresh quills, sealing wax, and every surviving ledger dragged from the estate office. The colonel and vicar were kept as witnesses, sober now and grimly attentive. Harbury signed until his fingers blackened with ink. Catherine stood at first by the fire, suddenly cold in every limb now that action had replaced danger. Her ears rang. She could still hear Lady Ross's voice, bird and bastard beggar, echoing from older rooms in another house. Mrs. Dodd appeared beside her with tea so strong it might have revived the dead. "Drink, miss." Catherine took it and discovered her hand was trembling too hard to hold the cup steady. Dodd quietly wrapped both hands around it until the shaking eased. Upstairs, Eliza had woken at the noise and cried for Catherine. The legal order had not yet been formally stayed. Propriety still tried to hold its line. Harbury ended that with one sentence. "Mrs. Dodd, bring Miss Ross to the nursery," he said, signing without looking up. "I will answer any magistrate who objects." Eliza met Catherine at the door in stockinged feet, ribbon clenched in her fist, eyes wide and frightened. Catherine knelt. The child flung herself into her arms with a force that nearly knocked them both sideways. "Are you sent away?" Eliza whispered into her shoulder. "No." "Promise true?" "Promise true." Eliza leaned back just enough to inspect her face. "You look like when storms come." Catherine laughed despite herself, a raw little sound. "That is accurate." Nurse tucked Eliza back in, while Catherine sat on the bed and smoothed damp curls from the child's brow. Down the corridor men's boots passed, voices low, doors opening and closing. The world was being rewritten in the next wing, line by line. When Eliza finally slept, Catherine returned to the library. Anstruther had drafted an emergency deed, immediate transfer of ward trust oversight from Penrith's chambers to a joint authority, Harbury and Anstruther, pending formal court ratification. A second instrument froze discretionary disbursements and required dual signatures for all withdrawals. A third notice, sealed and witnessed, notified the magistrate of probable fraud and attempted destruction of records. "Miss Ross," Anstruther said, looking up from his pages, "I require your signed statement while memory is fresh, dates, words, everything." She sat. She wrote. She did not soften a single line. When she finished, Harbury took the statement, read it once, and placed it with the others. Their fingers brushed at the edge of the paper. Both of them felt it and withdrew. At 2 a.m, Pike returned from the front drive, damp and expressionless. "Lady Ross's carriage has departed, my lord. Miss Amelia with her. 2 footmen accompanied them as far as the toll road and returned." "Any incident?" "Only language, my lord." Anstruther snorted. "I can imagine." By 3, seals were cooling in red pools across the table. By 4, the witnesses were released. At dawn, pale light entered the library and found Catherine still standing, too wired for sleep, staring at the piles of inked paper, that had cost so much. Harbury came to stand beside her. "It is done," he said. "No," she answered, eyes on the documents. "It is begun." He glanced at her, then nodded once. "Yes." Outside, the first cart rattled toward the kitchens. Somewhere a rook called from the yews. The house had survived the night and entered a different morning. 3 days later, when the worst of the legal fire was controlled, Harbury asked Catherine to walk in the old walled garden after supper. It was the first mild evening of spring. Damp earth breathed underfoot. Pear trees along the brick wall were dusted with white blossom. Eliza had gone to bed proud of a dictation exercise with only 2 errors and strict instructions that Catherine inspect it with severe face in the morning. Catherine came without shawl. The air was cool but clean. They walked once the length of the path before Harbury spoke. "Anstruther had word from London," he said. "Penrith has been suspended by his own partners, pending investigation. Bramwell has disappeared, but his bank drafts remain. Lady Ross's brother has agreed to take charge of her removal to Bath and refuses to settle her debts." Catherine exhaled, not quite relief, not quite fatigue. "And Amelia?" "Heard this afternoon she has accepted an offer from Mr. Felix Morland, second son, sensible income, widower with 1 daughter." Catherine almost smiled. She used to call him the man who smells of law books. "He does," Harbury said, and for the first time in days they shared a brief, startled laugh. Silence settled again, softer this time. At the stone bench near the sundial, he stopped. "There is one more matter, your father's portion." She looked sharply at him. "My portion?" "Anstruther traced the old marriage settlement after you mentioned it." He reached into his coat and handed her a folded document. "Lady Ross had delayed filing final acknowledgement for years. With her claims now under scrutiny, the trustees released what remained. It is not vast, but it is yours. Uncontested." Catherine stared at the page without opening it. "Yours," he repeated. She sat down abruptly on the bench, document in her lap, and pressed her fingertips to the paper as if testing whether it was real. "All these years," she said, almost to herself, "all these years I was told there was nothing left." "I know." "No," she said, looking up, eyes bright and hard. "You know the figures. You don't know what it is to have every choice priced above what you can pay." He took that without flinching. "Then let me say it better. I know I benefited from a world arranged for men like me to presume options. I did not see quickly enough what that cost you." She swallowed. The garden blurred for a moment and steadied. "I am not giving this to you," he said quietly. "I am not purchasing gratitude or binding you by generosity. I am returning what should never have been denied." She opened the document then, read the lines, the signatures, the sums. Her own name stood there in clean legal ink. Catherine Ross, sole beneficiary. For a long moment she could not speak. When she did, her voice was low. "Thank you." He sat beside her, leaving careful inches between them. "There is also Eliza." Catherine folded the paper and held it tight. "Yes." "Anstruther advises appointing an official companion and educational guardian for her, now that trust oversight has changed." He looked straight ahead, not at her. "I would like that person to be you, paid, contracted, with authority clear in writing. If you decline, I will respect it entirely." She turned to him. "You would trust me with that?" "I already do." Wind moved through the pear blossoms, lifting a few white petals that drifted down between them. He drew a breath that seemed to cost him. "Catherine!" No title now. He faced her fully, and the composure she had first mistaken for frost was gone. In its place was something more difficult. openness without armour. "I have loved you for some time," he said, badly at first, silently, defensively, as if naming it would endanger what you had already risked. "I told myself your safety required distance. In truth, some of that was fear. Fear of needing again. Fear of losing again. Fear that grief had made me unfit for tenderness, and that you would discover it before I could pretend otherwise." Her breath caught. "I do not ask you to answer tonight," he went on. "I ask only this. If there is any possibility that you might one day choose me, let me court you honestly in daylight, with no coercion, no debt between us." Catherine looked down at her hands. They were no longer shaking. "I saw you," she said after a moment. He frowned slightly. "Saw me?" "In the old nursery passage, my second night here." She met his eyes. "You were holding a child's shoe." Colour rose and drained from his face. "I pretended I had seen nothing," she said, "because it was not mine to take from you." For several seconds he did not speak. When he did, his voice was roughened. "Her name was Alice," he said. "She lived 3 years, 4 months, and 11 days. She adored apricots, hated stockings, and believed frogs could be reasoned with if addressed politely. The shoe was from the week before fever took her." Catherine listened, still as prayer. "I have not told that whole sentence to anyone in 2 years," he said. "Not even to myself." "I know." He laughed once under his breath, pained and astonished. "Of course you do." She reached across the careful inches and placed her hand over his. "I would like you to court me in daylight," she said, "and I would like to remain with Eliza. By choice." His fingers tightened around hers, reverent, almost disbelieving. "By choice," he repeated, "by choice." The chapel at Harbury held 40 people, if one was generous, and 30 if one was practical. On the morning of the wedding it held 23, a smell of beeswax and old stone, and enough spring light through stained glass to turn dust motes gold. Catherine stood in the vestry in ivory silk that had belonged to Harbury's mother, and been altered by Mrs. Dodd with fierce, tearful precision. Her hair was not pinned too tightly. Eliza, solemn in pale blue, served as self-appointed inspector of gloves and declared every adult insufficiently composed. "You must not cry before vows," she warned Harbury when he bent to kiss her forehead. "It smudges dignity." "I shall strive for dignity," he said gravely. Anstruther gave Catherine away with the expression of a man pretending not to be moved and failing. Pike stood at the back, like a carved saint of propriety. The colonel came polished to military brightness. The vicar's wife dabbed her eyes through half the service. When Catherine placed her hand in Nathaniel's, she felt the strength of it, the old restraint, and the new tremor beneath. "Aye, Catherine," she said, and her voice carried clear to the rear pew. "Take thee, Nathaniel." At the breakfast after, no one called her burden. No one asked her to carry a tray. She sat at the head beside her husband while Eliza dictated where sugared violets should be distributed for equitable joy. By late afternoon, the guests had gone. The house settled into that tender, relieved quiet after ceremony. Catherine changed from bridal silk into a simple dove-grey gown and asked Pike for the key to the family cabinet in the morning room. It was a walnut case with glass doors and shallow drawers, used for miniatures, christening cups, odd small heirlooms too intimate for display and too beloved for storage. Nathaniel met her there, leaning one shoulder against the mantel, watching. She carried a small parcel wrapped in linen. He knew what it was before she unfolded the cloth. The white kid shoe lay in her palm, scuffed at the toe, absurdly small. "For years," he said softly, "I kept it hidden as if grief were contraband." Catherine touched the worn leather once with her thumb. "Then let it be family, not contraband." She She placed the shoe in the cabinet's upper drawer beside Alice's miniature and closed it gently. Behind her, Nathaniel said her name. She turned. He held out his hand. This time, when she took it, neither of them looked away. Outside, evening light fell across Harbury's long front windows. In the nursery upstairs, Eliza was arguing with Nurse about whether countesses ought to read multiplication before bed. In the hall below, Mrs. Dodd directed footmen with satisfied tyranny. Life, ordinary and precious, moved through the house. Catherine stood in what had once been only a place of service and strategy and fear, and felt not triumph exactly, but a rival. Where silence had once been survival, it had become kindness, and where kindness had begun, love had learned to speak.